let's talk about short story writing, and which is the one thing we're supposed to be doing this whole time anyway. So, Gabby, I'm going to have to throw you back on the hot seat here, but it's a bit of a back and forth. So, we're writing stories in the community.
Mhm.
What makes a short story? What are the things that you don't do? What are the things that you do? Because we've got multiple anthologies. People are creating pitches, and I'm like, okay, that seems like a pretty good story. And then they go ahead and write it, and they send it in, and I'm reading the story, and it's like there's rookie mistakes, and that's kind of the whole point. We're all rookies coming together to get better at the practice of learning how to do stuff. But I think we're forgetting, or we don't understand what a short story is trying to do, as opposed to a chapter in a book versus a novella. Um, and I'm going to completely throw myself under the bus on that one too, in that I routinely write short stories that are mostly just letting off steam for a novel that I'm terrified to write. And so I just compress parts of it into a story and I try to give it an ending, and I know I'm opening up, hinting at stuff. I think that's still okay to do in a short story as long as the promise of the premise is delivered, which is the first 3 to 5 paragraphs says this short story is going to deliver on these specific things, whether it's an answer or an action adventure or an event. The story has to deliver on that. And maybe there's a little bit of a door that can be left open towards other things. But, if your friend is lost, do you find your friend? You don't do like it's like Indiana Jones. If there's like a treasure that needs to be found and you state that we're going after the doohickey of somebody, you have to find that thing by the end. You can't change it by the end and go, well, it's morally superior for us to not actually take this thing out of the place. Like, no, if it's a heist, you steal the gems. That's the point of the story. If the point of the story is you're a morally decrepit person and you have to learn how to do something and how to let stuff go, oh, and the subplot is a little bit of a heist, but you realize I actually need to let everything go and something. Okay, well, then the story was not actually about the gold. And you make that really clear right at the beginning. So it's like deliver on the promise of your opening points. That's one initial thought. What do you think, Gabby? What makes a short story a short story? Um, because it's a specific thing that is not a chapter or a novel like compressed down into like only 6,000 words or something.
Yeah, exactly. So a short story, I'm going to say, is a whole, complete, self I can't remember the word, but it stands on its own story. And the other thing is that while it needs to have a lot of the same elements as say, a full length novel or even a novella, so there needs to be a character with motivation and stakes. There needs to be a goal. There needs to be a character arc. It does need to have all those things, but it is not a novel. And I think that it's not just a novel that's short. It is a story that stands on its own. And I think that's what a lot of us fall into, myself included, is that when we are thinking about these stories, we think of all the things that we want to happen inside of them. And that's great for a novel. But if you want to fit something into 3,000 words, you can't have that much going on. In fact, I was laughing with my best friend the other day that the pitch that I actually did for Grim Winter, I wrote out all that was going to happen, and I was staring at it and I was like, that is not going to work in 3,000 words. That it's just not going to happen. And what I always say, and in fact, I was telling a client the other day because I run Bone Piercer Media, which is a media and editing company. And so I was working with a client and she was talking about word count. She was like, am I going to have to add more of a word count? I don't want it to get too long. And I was like, okay, if you don't want to make it too long, that is just fine. That's wonderful. That means you cut scenes, not word count. Sorry, you cut scenes, not words spent per scene. So the way to make a short story is not to have a bunch of scenes and to make them all shorter. It's to have fewer scenes, fewer progressions of things must happen. And that's why it can be a little bit challenging because you have to have an entire arc with stakes and plot and action going on in about, if you're lucky, 3 scenes. If you are lucky, but I have found that 1 to 2 scenes is really, really the sweet spot. And so I'm going to give you a little tip and trick. There's a little bit of a cheat code. And so that is, while, of course, plot, character arc, all of it needs to happen in a short story, you can You can imply things. I was about to say you can cut corners, but you can't cut corners. You can imply things rather than stating them. For example, a full-length novel, you would have, the normal world, you would have the inciting incident, you'd have the resistance to that, then you'd have the door of no return, and then you would go off on your journey, right? Most of that beginning can probably be cut. You probably want to start maybe like a sentence or two that's a little bit of normality. I mean, this is possibly a little bit of personal preference sneaking in here, but like I wouldn't put the first sentence where something explodes. You could, but it's always nice to have like a 1 to 2 sentence transition in, but you're not going to have an entire normal world, then inciting incident. The inciting incident probably has already happened. Your character probably already has a goal in mind that they have to get to, and you might spend, not immediately, but you might spend within the first third or so a few sentences kind of expressing, hey, this is what it was like before, this is what had to change, and that's why I am now on this journey. But you see, what you did there is you didn't take a beginning and just make it short, and you didn't take an inciting incident and made it short. You just shanghaied those out of the, I don't even know if I use that properly. You excused them. You jettison those, and you give enough context later so you know what's happening, but you focus and you delve hard and you immerse, and you just really go hard on the scenes that you select. And again, 1 to 2, 3 if you're lucky, 4 if you are just a little godling of writing. You know what I mean? Um, and so you have to be very selective about those scenes. What is going to make the most progress in one fell swoop, and what is going to be the most impactful? And a lot of times you're gonna have to simplify the story. You can't have some grand, elaborate, sneaky heist mystery political uprising in an epic fantasy world in a short story. Like you can't have Mistborn, because that's my new obsession. I cried last night when I finished it. You can't have the entirety of Mistborn as a short story. It just won't work. You might be able to isolate something similar to one scene. So if you were to make one scene and be like, okay, let's see if we could make this its own thing and make it there's a word and I'm not thinking of it. Make it stand on its own. Uh
Self-contained.
that come in.
Self-contained.
That's it. Thank you. Self-contained. Sorry, I don't know if that was really loud.
No, you're good.
Self-contained. If you could that you could do in a short story. You cannot have something on the grand scale of Mistborn in a short story. So, long story short, that was a pun and I didn't even mean to make it so. Anyway, to recap, you're going to want to make it very few scenes and make the scenes very simple but very powerful. And if you have to cut extraneous outside material, that's great. Do that because you want those scenes to really have an impact. Otherwise, it will just be a summary of a lot of things happening, and that's not a story. A story is when you're in the moment and you're living it, and it's done really well and really powerfully.
Yeah, yeah, very good. The challenges that immediately come to my mind when I'm trying to define what is a short story and what is not is there's always exceptions to the rule, and therefore it's not a good rule if there aren't exceptions to the rule. I'm thinking, for example, like O. Henry, right? And he wrote his story. What is it, The Three Magi? And it's about two characters, and it happens over the period of like a while, and it's not following any of the rules that we're talking about. So I think a good what's going to be helpful is you have to learn rules, not so that you can break them, but so that you know how and when to apply them. So, some things that are helpful to me and that I think are good to practice, they're good to learn. Um, Parameters for how to learn to create a good short story. And if you can learn to do that, I'm not saying that I'm a genius, but these are the things that have made sense to me that I'm holding on, so I'm trying to pass them on. Keep it within a short time frame. Don't have it run for a massive period of time. That is a much harder story to sustain as opposed to a single scene of two characters arguing in a cafe. And the point of the story, you have to answer the question, what is the point? And you should be able, I think, to summarize that in a single sentence. Throw myself under the bus here, or put myself up as an example. The short story that I wrote for Thrill Runners, the whole thing is a heist. It's a heist that goes wrong. They try to steal something out of a high-tech situation and it goes wrong. That's the story. And you try to deliver that in 6,000 words. If you have well, the character's in love with the enemy queen and he's trying to get something to her and she doesn't believe him. And then the bad guy ends up doing this thing and then he has to change the plan to ultimate. It's okay. You've just described a novella. Maybe go and do that novella. A story or a short story might be you're trying to deliver a thing, hoping it'll have an outcome, and then there's the handoff. Will you make the handoff? That's the story. Or Queen didn't believe you and threw you in the dungeon. Do you survive? That could be the story. And it could technically be a section out of a much bigger story. But the point is, it's like we talked earlier about the promise of the premise, which sounds like a tongue twister. But it's when you're setting up the story. This makes sense to me, and I've seen this done really well, and so I'm trying to make it my habit. Within the first 3 to 5 paragraphs, you should have stated who the character is, what do they want, where is this story going, and in a sense of the world that it's in. In 3 to 5 paragraphs, you have got to nail that. If I'm reading by the end of page 2 and I don't know where this is going or why I should care, there's going to be something wrong, with the rest of the story. So 2 pieces of it's if you can learn this and practice this, it is awesome advice. One is literally state what your main character wants as the first thing when you meet him. I want X, or I'm going to do X, whatever it is. So the first thing that they say is the thing that is most important to them. I learned this piece of advice when you introduce a character in a book. You'll now start seeing this maybe all over the place in movies. As soon as I learned this piece of advice, I was starting to watch. I was watching John Wick 2. And then I realized, oh my gosh, they did it in this movie, which is the very first thing a character says is a thing that sums up their character. It's not just like, oh, could you pass me the salt, please? Thank you very much. And how was your day? It's like, no. In the very first scene where you meet 2 characters in the beginning of John Wick, they recap who their characters are and kind of the roles they play in the story. They introduce 2 side characters. One said to the other, he's the tall black concierge, and he goes, I hope that Mr. Wick is going to be okay now that the whole city's out for blood. And it's like, man, that is a perfect summary of the gentility and the care and the attention of his character. And they just sum that up. And then the head of the Continental replies something like, I think, he's good at his job. I'd be more afraid for everybody else. It's like, oh yeah, he's kind of a callous, businessman sort of thing. That line sums up his character. That's an awesome little tactic for introducing characters in a story. Can you capture their character in a single sentence? And then if you're doing a short story, can you capture what the character wants? And I think you'll notice this in a lot of movies, a lot of stories. It can feel really on the nose as an author trying to write this out. Your audience doesn't actually perceive it that way, which is kind of cool. It's a bit like a magician. A magician has hand wavium. Pay no attention to the thing I'm quietly doing behind my back. Like, look, stars, and then you pull the card out, right? And that's what authors do. Look, world building, character change, right? It's exactly what authors are doing. So have somebody ask the character, what do you want? There's again, I'll pull from my own experience, short story I wrote where it was for the Coco Cafe, where 2 characters meet each other and they're both lying to each other. And the first thing trying to share in 3 to 5 sentences or 3 to 5 paragraphs, what does the main character want? And his life depends on it. And then when the new, other character comes in, they very clearly, literally sit down and ask each other, what do you want? What are we dealing with? But you don't want to, if you want to take things to the next level, you don't straight up say those words. You try to it's a bit weird to sit down and look at somebody and go, what do you want out of life? It's like you go, so, where'd you grow up? What did you wish you would be when you grew up? What's not working for you these days? And you're kind of like edging around the central question of what do you want? It's how we all operate, when we're asking each other questions. So try to answer that question. What does the main character want? And then make sure that they get that by the end of the story. Like Gabi said, don't have multiple scenes trying to track, a huge conversion experience. I remember trying to create a conversion experience where a brother hated his sister. She was in a car accident. He decided he loved her. And I thought it was the hardest thing to make work because I wanted him to dislike her throughout the whole thing until the car accident. And then by the end, I never felt like it actually worked. And the reason why was because the conversion experience was so massive. It was a 180-degree, enemies to lovers kind of thing. Um, you can't squish a whole trope like that into a short story. It's why it needs multiple different experiences. Now, you can have a 1% conversion rate, like, okay, fine, maybe you're not so bad. I'll tolerate you. Okay, that is a more believable progression in the space of like a story. And then the other tip, which is also really awesome, you'll notice this, it'll be done a lot. Somebody will literally ask the other person, oh no, this seems impossible. What are you going to do? And that is an awesome way to get characters out of their heads and into action by literally having somebody else ask them, what are you going to do? Okay, here's my plan. You straight up create side characters, not just to have massive internal worlds on their own. They're literally created to be like thorns in your main character's side, to poke at them and ask them and get them to be externalizing things. And so when you create a character, this is why Disney always pairs a princess with a little thing, so that you have something to interact with and talk to and externalize your inner world. You'll notice this as you continue to like watch lots of movies. Sometimes you'll create like bigger side characters and the more will be happening with them. In a short story, don't do that. Characters are flat. Main character is the one that has maybe the most depth. And side characters really exist to poke at the main character and get them to externalize what's going on. Because in a short story, the point usually is, again, you state a rule, there's always exceptions. In the point of a main story, the main character and what they're going through is the point of the thing. And it's usually limited by time, limited by number of experiences. If there's like a conversion, like you need someone to change their mind, don't expect to go a 180-degree change within the space of a story. So, Gabi, or Gianna, if there's any questions or thoughts, on that to simplify or clarify or enrich any of that, what would you say? And Gabi, I'll poke at you first if you want.
Yeah, no, I thought that you covered it all really well. I love how you said that there were exceptions to the rule because, like, as you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, I actually have read like a short story that was really good that did span like decades, but it was almost in kind of like a episodic fashion where he would talk about different things that would happen, and those even just little snippets felt really immersive. That's not something I have experience with, so I don't have kind of like practiced advice to give, but I loved how you said there were exceptions to the rule. I love how you said not so many characters. I neglected to mention that. Not a cast. You get 3. You get 3 people if you want, obviously. Again, exceptions to the rule. If you manage to do an entire, Merry Fellowship of the Ring or whatever the Hobbit and those 13 people are, if you manage to do that, more power to you. 3 is usually a good safe spot. That's the amount of people that can really do something useful in 1 to 2 scenes. I love the thing that you said about the dialogue. You had told me that and I forgot about it. And then as you kept talking, I was like, ooh, how am I going to put that in ending? I think that was great. Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic. Gianna, any thoughts or questions?
I think all of the things that you both said were really, really helpful, especially as someone who, yeah, isn't as familiar with what, the nuances that make, a novella and a short story different, or distinct from a novel that is simply short. And I think it was really helpful to hear from both of you, or to understand from both of you that a short story is not a novella, and that a short story is also not a short novel. And here's kind of like the general or the usual formula, I guess, for it. So that's all I can say. I think it's really helpful to like hear from both of you. What are the parameters that you guys would have.
Nice. I can see you were taking so many notes and all that.
Yeah, I was taking so many notes.
The notes that people take.
Yeah, I have 3 pages of like. Well, I mean, this is tiny, so that's why it's 3 pages of it. So yeah.
Oh, that's cool. So then to recap a little bit, if you're creating a short story, it's obvious the definition of a story is a character who wants something bad enough to do something about it. In a novel, what you do is you take that and then you stack it in like maybe 3 major sections. First problem, oh, I wasn't aware that this is everything happening in the world. Let me recalibrate and try again. Second problem, man, I'm better, but still not really mapped up to how big this problem situation is. Third act, okay, I think I've finally got it. Now we're going to finally make it work. That's a novel. In a short story, it's usually going to be character who wants something bad enough to do something about it, and there's usually maybe like one problem to overcome. Now, if you're an overachiever, or maybe someone like me, I'll try to create like 3 small things or 3 short little problems, and then you create, the situation to sort of get through. So, for example, the story that I crafted for, I'm just gonna. What was the name of the book? Thrill Runners. The story for Thrill Runners. It's like a heist that then goes wrong, and then they have to create a new answer to get out of an impossible situation. So the first major problem, he airdrops into the skyscraper and then has to find a new way to get out when somebody shoots one of the bad guys shoots one of his teammates, and so he then gives her the escape plan that he was going to take. Now he's got to have plan B, and that would normally be like, okay, that's it. You get into the tunnels and then you're out. I'm like, well, if you're in a skyscraper, you really want to add more detail that also kind of explores the world, but shows maybe a little bit more of the character. So try to get out through the elevator shaft, and then you get on a traveling thing, and then a drone affects you, and then you have to jump into the cruise ship, right, to get out. And so it's still the same major problem, plan B, but then you added little problems in between it. So it's not to say you still can't have complexity and lots of things, going on. Turns out I write short stories to just do actiony stuff, but mostly to spend time with a character that I've been spending time like, oh, this seems like a really cool character. So avoid too much. Again, the point is a character who wants something bad enough to do something about it and overcomes the problems. And you're going to set that up in 3 to 5 paragraphs. And then in about 6,000 words, 5,000 words, you deliver that, and you avoid too much backstory, world building, other characters. Gabi nailed it. Maybe 3 characters is probably enough. Maybe there's an antagonist. Again, the side characters are not going to have their own conversion experiences. They're literally going to exist to get your main character to do stuff or to say stuff or to support them. So friends, if you're watching this and you've got other opinions and you absolutely want to take us to town, go ahead and do that in the comments.